Good evening, brothers and sisters. I want to thank you, Victoria, for letting us to use her wonderful coffee shop. This is our second home. And I am going to thank all the comrades to give us this opportunity that we can learn about what's going on the agenda for Iran. The name Iran comes from Aryans, and the Aryans were living, according to the history, the first impressions they found in the old Iran comes from 400,000 years ago. Then if we come to I'm going to give a brief history of Iran, then we can understand why it's so important, even for the new world.
Just to make this a little easier for you, so you're really right into it all the time. Try that.
I think, it's not too loud?
No.
Okay. Well, yeah, they found, traces of primitive stones that the humans that they lived in the plateau of Iran from 400,000 years ago. We have cities in Iran that there is trace of life from 70 years ago, which still are present in Iran, including Shush, one of the cities in Iran. Then if we come closer to the time, in the prehistoric area, there was people that they lived over there, they were called Elamites. After that, we come to the early history of Iran from 3000 BC to 625. And that's the area that about a millennium before BC, the Zoroastrians started constructing the Iran with the kingdom of Ma'at. And after that, we come to the 2500 years of kingdom and dynasties in Iran, going one after other to the Middle Ages, which from 1501 is the first year that the Iranians turned into Shiites. And now, talking a little bit about the geography of Iran. When I left Iran in 1982, the population was 30 million. Now the population is 78 million. Our population have been changing through the centuries. We lost half of our population with the invasion of Genghis Khan. We lost 30% of our population one time in Iran because of the Black Death, which was a sort of a medical disease that wiped out 30% of our population. And through the history, we have been invaded several times. The recent ones we can talk about is the fraction of Iran by the Anglo-Russians. If we look at the map of Iran, from the north, from Caspian Sea, the southern parts of the Soviets, Turkmenistan, and to the east, we talk about the Pakistan and Afghanistan, and to the south, we talk about Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, and further down to Egypt. And on the left, we talk about Iraq and Turkey. The texture of Iran right now, more than 2/3 of the population in Iran are under age of 25. And the majority of Iranian youths are educated. And also in the fourth country in the world by using computers and internet and blogging. These are things that they were non-existent when I was there. And it's the 18th country by population in the world. And if we want to talk about the economy of Iran, The GDP of Iran is around 800 billion, maybe recently even closer to a trillion, I have heard. And now we have to speak, I can choose things that why makes Iran such a hard topic these days. 1907 was the first time that the Anglo-Russian division of Iran happened. In 1921, these are the numbers that shows us and teaches us what has been happening to Iran. In 1921, the last dynasty, which was Qajar, and they had ruled for centuries, Reza Khan, which was the father of Shah, he did a coup d'etat with the help of the British to get power. And the new dynasty of Pahlavi started from 4 years after that, from 1925 to 1979, which the Islamic Revolution happened. And because we are socialists in this group, I want to address something about the left in Iran. There were two major socialist parties in Iran. One of them was called Tudeh, which is mostly well known around the world because the members of it, at points, they were 150,000 active and up to millions supporters. And the second party that in Iran, I was a member of them as well, was Fadayan, which they were the more militant and mostly youth. And it was a Marxist group. And because of the background of religion in Iran, it was extremely difficult to do any kind of socialist activities. And in 1964, I have to go back and forth about the dates. Or maybe I can change it at this point. When the 1921 coup d'etat happened and the Reza Khan got the power for Iran, he was anti-Russian and pro-German. And because of these facts, he was able only to hold the power for 16 to 20 years. And the United States and Britain together, they had made a plot which was called through the person which was called Mr. Iran, and through the ambassador named Allen Dulles. They financed another coup d'etat in Iran, which on 1953, when I was 2 years old, I don't remember it, but I had read about it. This coup d'etat happened to Iran, and our elected Prime Minister Mossadegh, which he was planning to he did actually nationalize the Iranian oil company. They overthrew him, and since 1953 we went under the financial pressure and military pressure from the United States, and the government in Iran, and autocratic, bureaucratic, and a dictatorship that there was no chance for any kind of movement really through the Sabak, which was their police, Gestapo like police that Shah had. And I can't go through the details of what happened with the left in Iran because it's out of our talk for over here. And mainly I want to say some few historic points. The name of Iran has been Persia and officially at 1935 changed to Iran. And I can talk briefly about the revolution of Iran. It's easy to say 1979, but in 1979 I was 27 years old. This revolution started almost a 10 years prior to that. The dissatisfaction and the social pressure and discrepancy in wealth distribution and not having any kind of social freedom in Iran was building up, and something was needed to be done. And the youth, students, teachers, university students, young officers, men and women equally, they started, organizing. And in 1978, the actions started happening, exactly a year before the revolution. We were seeing demonstrations on the streets every single day. We were seeing participation of police and military and SAWAK, arresting, beating, and jailing, and even exiling people. But nobody was afraid anymore. Everyone was in the revolutionary mode, and it was like a snowball that there was no way back. It was getting larger and bigger and sounding like a thunder, to the point that in 1978, 77 to 78, I was supposed to be a military doctor because it's mandatory in Iran to serve 2 years in army. And I was drafted into the military as a first lieutenant to be an army doctor. Unfortunately, I served for 1 year as a soldier because they took my ranks off of me because I was a rebellion. All the time I was fighting with my high rank officers. And I had 180 soldiers with me that they were taking orders from me rather than taking from the, let's say, colonel or a general. Because that was the mood in those days. And they were afraid that if I leave, I take those 180 with me. And soldiers also, they were easy to talk to. We were not afraid of talking to soldiers about revolution. That reminds me of the book we were reading about the Russian Revolution. Because the army was getting divided. Half of them, they were coming towards the people. I would say the other half were still afraid and they were, following the regime. Then gradually got to the point that after 1 year, I had to leave. I had to leave the military base. Getting shot on my car, and those are personal stories I don't want to get into, but I managed to get out and join the revolutionaries. Rather than being in a military base, I joined them on the scene. And we were organizing and protesting, and me, because of my background as a physician and serving in the military for a year, I knew all the bases, I knew where all the weapons were, and I knew most of the junior officers, and I knew the soldiers. Then it was easy to get into going around with what was going on. And the brutality was beyond belief, much more so than what we see for occupation these days. I know people get really worried and they get really angry when they see pepper spray, or when they see beatings by batons, or maybe in England, the fascist police attacking by horses to people and whatnot, and sometimes spreading tents on people here. But for us, it was only bullets and it was tanks. And sometimes they were scaring us by flying helicopters over our heads. And my mentor, Dr. Shakibai, is from Iran here. He knows about Iran. There is a square in Tehran named Jaleh. That Jaleh square was our Tahrir square, similar to Tahrir square of Egypt. And the day that army opened up their fires into innocent people's chest and they attacked them by tank, that was the day that turned the revolution into winning. From that day on, the army got scared of people and people started winning. We managed to open up the military bases and people get armed because there was no other way to battle the military. It wasn't as easy as people think that to win, and by numbers I have heard